Diese Konferenz wird nun aufgezeichnet.
Okay, so another point we will have in the closure of this webinar, there will be a session question and answers. We received some questions already ahead of this meeting. So if ever you come across burning questions, please don't be shy and just post it in the chat function. And this chat function you see in this GoToMeeting application, it looks a bit strange. It's like a circle. Now it's showing a red one for The presentation will be shared afterwards on the website of the event and also the webcast itself. Okay, so with this, I'd like to give a very nutshell introduction to the KliK Foundation. You see it there displayed on the slides and kick off. So the KliK Foundation is an agency, a private-owned agency, a foundation, and which is tasked to procure the international emission reductions that Switzerland has pledged in its NDC. And to this end, we established a procurement program about which we will be telling you. Excellent. So now I'd like to give a brief introduction into the legal framework in which the KliK Foundation is operating in. First of all, as we all know, it is the international obligation that gives rise, as mentioned before, to this activity. Switzerland has pledged in total a minus 50% versus the 1990 emission levels, of which 30% shall be established or created domestically in Switzerland by means of Swiss legislation and measures, and the rest shall be produced internationally through the acquisition of ITMOs. Then, equally important to understand that the KliK Foundation does not operate under the multilateral obligation of the Paris Agreement. Much more, it operates under the framework of the CO2 Act of Switzerland. And the CO2 Act obliges the motor fuel importers to offset part of the transport emission created in Switzerland through burning of diesel and petrol. And to this end, the motor fuel importers founded the foundation because they are not really, it's not their core business to develop climate change mitigation activities. And therefore, they founded the KliK Foundation already back in 2012 because the Swiss law, which is being revised now, is in force since 2013 or before, but since 2013, this provision entered the Swiss CO2 Act. And under that frame, in the period 2013 to 2020, the KliK Foundation already procured 6.5 million tons of Swiss domestic attestations to fulfill its obligation under the law. Now, from 2021 onwards, the obligation is increased domestically, but is extended also to international mitigation outcomes that will have the form of ITMOs. Now, a bit more technical, how does this work? So as I said, the KliK Foundation is liable or obligated under the Swiss CO2 Act, and the Swiss CO2 Act provides for offset fractions, increasing offset fractions that must be, or that basically against which the targets are derived. It's an ascending share or an ascending fraction. You see a red and a blue line and a triangle. So the blue line is the share of emissions that must be offset by means of domestic mitigation outcomes. And the red line is the share that has to be brought forward by means of ITMOs. And you see it's reaching, or it's intended to reach by 2030, roughly 90% of the transport emissions that must be offset in this instrument under the Swiss CO2 law. While the domestic fraction is put forward in the CO2 law as a minimum fraction to be offset, the red line is set by the Federal Council and with the intention to match the residual required, or the residual, or the obligation under the NDC. And currently, as it stands, it will be roughly 35 million ITMOs that needs to be procured. While the NDC would provide for a fraction or a part that is as much as 54 million tons, the current CO2 law is more ambitious in the domestic part, which means that the residual will be smaller than the 55 million ITMOs. And of course, we hope that this domestic target will be achieved. In terms of funding, we expect to require roughly $1 billion in the period between 2021 and 2030. Now, you may ask yourself, is this funding, where does this funding come from, and is it capped? For this question, you have to understand that how the foundation is funded. So we have members, and these members are the motor fuel importers that are compliant under the CO2 Act, and they are shifting the compliance by means of membership to the KliK Foundation. So the KliK Foundation itself is liable under the CO2 Act, and the members, they contribute funds proportional to their fuel sales, and at the rate that is cost covering to procure all these domestic and international emission reductions. And of course, the foundation will use these funds to procure the mitigation outcomes. The foundation is active internationally since 2019. Since last year, we had already 2 call for proposals, of which we will be speaking later on in the part Michael, my colleague, is explaining to you. But through the Climate Cent Foundation, the sister foundation, we are since 2016 already active in developing so-called pilot activities, of which you may have heard. This is an activity carried out by the Climate Cent Foundation and also funded by the Climate Cent Foundation. Now, the means for compliance internationally, domestically, that's Swiss Kitchen. It's a Swiss domestic offset scheme, but internationally, it's all under the Paris Agreement. You know, it could be Article 6.4, and it can be Article 6.2, while the Article 6.4 is still, in our view, a bit further away. the KliK Foundation is, and also the Swiss government is active in the mindset of the Article 6.2, the bilateral cooperation, and this is already possible and operational. So from this, it's also clear that there are specific requirements to the mitigation outcomes or the mitigation activities. It is, of course, the avoidance of double counting and the corresponding adjustment, which is very much in the fore when the KliK Foundation and also Switzerland goes about international cooperation, and equally the sustainable development, which is also funded in the or provided for in the Paris Agreement text. And it also is very important to understand that these activities shall rise the ambition through the cooperation and not undermine the ambition. There, additionally, we will have the requirements from the CO2 Act. Basically, we will talk about that later. It's about carbon lock-in and financial additionality to a certain share, but you can basically summarize it as San Jose principles to which the Swiss government has subscribed to. Now, equally important to understand is the framework under which the mitigation activities and the procurement by the KliK Foundation takes place. We are basically restricted to an underlying or framing bilateral agreement between Switzerland and the transferring country. The leading house there is the FOEN, the Federal Office for Environment, which is the competent entity within the leading ministry of Switzerland. So this entity is also negotiating with transferring countries bilateral agreements. The bilateral agreements basically put forward the obligations with regards to the CO2 accounting, corresponding adjustments, and so on, and also the modalities and procedures of the transfers, and also the basic requirements for the authorization, 6.3 of the activities. And this sets basically the framework under which the KliK Foundation is able to operate on a commercial basis. So that's the second layer. So we have these two layers, the bilateral layer and the commercial layer. And in the commercial layer, the procurement takes place. So we are dealing with private or government counterparts in private law, or it's a contract between private entities or government entities. And these contracts define the compensation and also the modalities for the payment. And we also do develop and support the activities. About this we will speak later on more. So to bring a bit color into the picture, I'd like to present this display. So we have again the two layers: the bilateral agreement layer between the transferring country and the and Switzerland, and we have in green the commercial layer between the project owner, which can be private or government, and the KliK Foundation. And what's important to understand that the two entities connected in the commercial layer, the project owner and KliK Foundation, they operate under the domestic laws and not under the bilateral agreement. The bilateral agreement does not provide for specific rules, such as, for example, the JCM, the Japanese mechanism has in terms of joint committees and so on. So this architecture is without joint committees, and it's more about the parallel decision making under the domestic regulations. Good, and specifically the request for authorization and the authorization of the mitigation activity under the bilateral agreement, and also the transfer, the authorization of the transfer. These two actions are provided for in the bilateral agreement, and they happen basically in parallel with a specific modality. Good. Before we dive a bit deeper into the processes, a very brief overview of the procurement process. So the first stage for private entities is a so-called EOI, expression of interest. The KliK Foundation only cooperates with private entities that have been previously registered. So the EOI stage is to register private entities. Then we acquire mains, so-called mains, mitigation activity idea notes, through direct submissions in the case of governments, and competitive submissions, call for proposals for registered private entities. And those pre-selected, those mains pre-selected, they will be developed at the second stage, the MAT stage, mitigation activity description document stage. And this stage will be supported by the KliK Foundation and will lead to the third stage, the MOPA, the purchase agreement, to secure the long-term financing of the mitigation outcome. We will discuss this in the next few slides. Here again, the two tracks: government, which is direct, with direct registration, no competitive process. So every government entity can register and submit mains to us, while the private entities on the left side, they have to go through the expression of interest once phase, and then they get access to the call for proposals, and this all goes through an online interface. So now, if you wonder now what's happening with the mains, this will be Michael, my colleague, who is telling you more about it. I first have to find him to give him the moderator role. Where are you? Das ist noch schwierig.
So thank you very much, Micha, and warm good morning or good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, from my side. My name is Michael Brennwald, and I will give you on the next slides an overview of the KliK Foundation's ITMO procurement process and on our current portfolio. By way of introduction, please note that the presentation or the slides that follow will give a simplified overview of the interaction between the different actors in the procurement process. The political processes, for example, the negotiation of a bilateral agreement between the governments, they are not shown in detail. Furthermore, the actual process in practice may differ from the described one, depending on the specific circumstances of the proposed mitigation activity and provisions in the bilateral agreement. In this presentation, the different steps from submission to implementation of a mitigation activity are presented in the form of a flowchart, and each step is explained. The following symbols are used in the flowchart. We have processes, we have decisions, and we have flow lines. As mentioned already by Micha, this presentation will be published later on our website at international.klik.ch. Important note is that KliK may change this presentation at any time without notice. We do not accept any liability whatsoever for any damage or loss that may arise from the use of the information contained in this presentation. Having said that, let's start with the process. It is defined in the 11 steps, and the first.
Sorry, you're muted. We can't hear you.
I am, indeed. I am. Sorry for that. Okay. So let's start again with step number 1, which is, first of all, the registration of the interested party as a registered entity with KliK. As said, this happens online. And upon registration, a party can submit its mitigation activity proposal online as well. Private institutions submit MAs in periodic calls for proposals. Governmental bodies can submit their mitigation activity proposal anytime. Documents that need to be submitted include the mitigation activity idea note, which explains in detail the proposed idea, and a letter of intent from the transferring country with which it confirms its support of the proposed mitigation activity, its willingness to perform, its general willingness to talk about the performance of corresponding adjustments, and enter talks for bilateral agreement with Switzerland. Upon submission of the mitigation activity proposal, we at the KliK Foundation, we evaluate in a second step the mitigation activity against a set of criteria which are publicly available. There are 3 possible outcomes of that evaluation. A rejection if a mitigation activity does not meet the no-go criteria of KliK. We will not proceed further and inform the applicant accordingly. Resubmission of the updated mitigation activity can happen in the next call for proposal. A second outcome could be a resubmission where KliK is in general interested in the mitigation activity, but requests or requires the applicant to make certain adjustments to the design of the activity. A third outcome is the pre-selection, when all no-go criteria are met and the mitigation activity is approved by the KliK board. In case of resubmission and pre-selection, we will provide feedback in form of corrective action requests or forward action requests and provide that to the applicant so that it knows what to do next. If a mitigation activity is pre-selected and a first contact between the two governments took place, we would request the applicant to apply for a letter of intent from Switzerland, which confirms, or through which the government of Switzerland would confirm its no objection to the mitigation activity and the transferring country. If such LOI from Switzerland is issued, we can move on to the next steps, which is step number 4, where the KliK Foundation, upon receipt of the letter of intent from Switzerland and the resolution of all corrective action requests, would issue a so-called letter of support, where we confirm our readiness to fund the development of the mitigation activity design document, the MAD, and a business model that's basically an investment or a cash flow model, where you show at the end what price you would need to implement or for the ITMOs generated by the mitigation activity. In this respect, or for that purpose, KliK provides online the terms of reference for the development of the MAD and the business model. We provide a template of the MAD, and we provide a resolution protocol to track the development of the mitigation activity design documents. To give you an indication in terms of time and funding, we would expect the development of the MAD and the business model not to take longer than around 12 months, and we would be ready to fund the development with an amount of around 150,000 euro in total. Moving on to the next step, number 5, applicants prepare, first of all, a technical and financial proposal for the attention of KliK based on the terms of references and all other documents provided. And upon signing of a contract with KliK, the applicant develops the mitigation activity design documents in an iterative process with KliK and other stakeholders, such as the government of Switzerland and the government of the transferring country. During the development of the activity, KliK would intend to fix the key commercial terms in a term sheet as a basis for the MOPA negotiations, which come later. When the mitigation activity design documents are completed, we will evaluate them and present them for approval to our board and to the government of Switzerland and the transferring country. If this evaluation is positive and all questions are answered, we can move on to validation. However, the precondition for moving on to validation to step number 7 is the bilateral agreement that needs to be in place by then between the government of Switzerland and the transferring country. If this is the case, an independent validator validates the MAD, the documents, against the requirements set out in this bilateral agreement. The validator presents its findings and requests for revision, if any, in the validation report to the involved parties. If required, applicant shall revise the MAD further. Assuming that the validation is successful, the authorization process starts, which is the formal acceptance of the mitigation activity by the transferring country and the government of Switzerland in accordance with Article 6.3 of the Paris Agreement and the bilateral agreement. The authorization process in both countries can run in parallel, but they are independent of each other. Importantly, if either government do not authorize the mitigation activity, it cannot continue. When the mitigation activity is authorized, we can move on to step number 10, where we enter the commercial part of the transaction. The compensation by KliK for the ITMOs generated by the mitigation activity is result-based and governed by the so-called Mitigation Outcome Purchase Agreement, MOPA. The MOPA includes the terms for the implementation and operation of the activity, as well as generation and payment of ITMOs and the payment of the unit price. The MOPA is signed by KliK and the seller of the ITMOs. This could be the applicant or someone else, depending on the mitigation activity design. The MOPA negotiations may be initiated by KliK at any point during the process, and as said earlier, it is based on the term sheet signed by the parties earlier. Upon signing of the MOPA, the applicant implements and operates the mitigation activity in accordance with the MAD and MOPA. We would then, according to the MOPA, require periodic verification of the greenhouse gas reductions achieved and periodic transfer of ITMOs from the transferring country to the government of Switzerland and KliK in accordance with the bilateral agreement. Payment for the ITMOs will occur upon delivery to KliK. So we do not provide the project finance for implementing the mitigation activity. However, the exact procedure of ITMO issuance and transfer, they are defined in bilateral agreements between the countries and of course vary as well between countries. Now, after this, let's say, rather dry description of the process, I would like to give you a short overview of our current portfolio of mitigation activities we have received so far. In 2 calls for proposals we conducted in 2019 and 2020, we have received in total 60 mitigation activity proposals from private and governmental entities. Of these 60 proposals, we had to refuse 28 mitigation activities because they did not comply with our criteria. For example, some of them were not financially additional, which is one of our no-go criteria. The remaining 31 mitigation activities, which we have evaluated in more detail, they have now achieved certain stages in the process. 50 of them are in the status of resubmission. That's the red part. That means we have requested the applicants to redesign or to update the mitigation activity proposal and provide us with an updated version of the main whenever they want. So there's no deadline. They do not have to comply with call for proposals anymore. 9 mitigation activities have been pre-selected, but they still have some corrective action requests open that they need to resolve before we can enter the MAD phase. 7 mitigation activities have been pre-selected and have resolved all cars, and we are in the process of contracting them from the MAD development or have already contracted them, and MAD development is ongoing. One government mitigation activity proposal is currently under evaluation. It is not shown in the chart on the left. If you may have asked yourself why there are only 59 and not 60 included. To give you a kind of a flavor of where these mitigation activities are located. Of the total 31 mitigation activities with status pre-selection, pre-selected or resubmission, 12 mitigation activities each are in Africa and Latin America and the Caribbean. That's the green and blue area in the chart on the left. 6 mitigation activities are in Asia and 1 is located in Eastern Europe. Technologies applied include, well, renewable energy, waste to energy, biogas, improved cookstove, and energy efficiency activities. Maybe of the 7 mitigation activity proposals, which are now in the MAD development phase, 5 of them are located in Africa and 2 are in Latin America. An overview of these 7 proposals can be found on our website at international.klik.ch. With this, I hand over back to you, Micha. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I think I just jump into the next part, the part on requirements, and also to give you an example what would be considered as being good or good mitigation activities. Do you see me? Yeah. Okay. So now, what's the scope of the call for proposals and the scope of activities the KliK Foundation is looking for? Important to understand that the KliK Foundation is not making the rules. The KliK Foundation is regulated by the Swiss government, and the Swiss government is ultimately defining the rules, the requirements. And as I said, these requirements are derived from the CO2 Act and the Paris Agreement or the rule book. Human rights and sustainable development are a central pillar in looking at the activities and also environmental integrity, the corresponding adjustment part, but also the real verifiable and permanent part of the activities. Now, what we also can say from just already here from as derived from the CO2 Act and the Paris Agreement, certain technologies will fail in that sense. So excluded is nuclear power, and also excluded are measures that deal with improved electricity generation based on fossil fuels. What is not excluded but made difficult to go through are demand-side energy efficiency measures that ultimately rely on fossil fuels. And what's also limited are all land-based activities like RED and AFOLU, LULUCF, and so on, due to the fact that the status of these mitigation outcomes also under the Paris Agreement are not yet entirely clear. And also it's not clear if the Swiss government would allow or would allow these mitigation outcomes to be accounted for. With each call for proposal, the KliK Foundation is publishing a tender documentation in which the detailed evaluation criteria are explained and detailed. Still, I'd like to give a very top view on how Switzerland and the KliK Foundation, what are the main criteria looking at or evaluating the mitigation outcomes. What's very important to understand that the KliK Foundation is looking for activities that go that do not compete and overlap with domestic measures the host country is developing to meet its NDC. So we have measures, domestic measures that form part of the so-called NDC package devised by the host country to meet its NDCs. And the mitigation activities the KliK Foundation is looking for, they are outside of this NDC package and in ambition above this package, also in order to avoid all kind of overlaps and also to avoid the risk of overselling. We do not want to crowd out the options of a country to meet its NDC. Also, in order to safeguard environmental integrity, there must be a way handling an overlap with climate finance. The Switzerland and the KliK Foundation will do attribution of mitigation outcomes according to the share of climate finance and carbon finance. And what's also important to say is that still the contribution of the KliK Foundation plays a material role in for the business model of the activity. Then another complex of requirements is around the commercial risks. We do want to have or to see a strong support and backing by the local authorities, and also to see a strong congruence with domestic policies and measures. This to avoid a situation that that we run into frictions between the goals of the host country or the transferring country and the project owner. Then, of course, the counterparty has to show that it is capable and strong enough to handle the program, and the business case must be plausible. And of course, good governance, human rights, and sustainable development is a key requirement to showcase that there will be that the project is on a good track. The roster of evaluation will be published with each tender, and there may be specific scopes with each tender. So we, so far, the two calls for proposals had no restrictions in terms of geography and technology. In future, we may be a bit more specific and look for more specific technologies or setups. Once the mitigation activity has been pre-selected, we will provide for additional guidance, more specific guidance in the terms of reference to the development of the MAD. The terms of reference will contain guidance for that specific activity. We also developed specific guidance documents that are not published yet, for example, for the improved cookstoves programs. And also, of course, the resolution protocol will contain additional guidance and requirements. I'd like to conclude this part with two case studies, very brief. The first case is the, you don't see it? Yeah, sorry. Now, the first case is biogas digester program in Senegal. it's an enhanced action of the national household biodigester program that is being implemented in Senegal. And the main reason, or one of the compelling elements that we liked, is the fact that it's basing its model on the standardized crediting framework. It has been developed by the World Bank with Senegal. That means that, which implies that there is a decision body around, that there are procedures already and laws or decrees around that are able to govern and steer the development of the MAD and also the program itself. Furthermore, they had a very convincing business model that, in the sense that they, on top of the biodigester model, they created, or they intend to achieve through the sales and aggregation of fertilizer, the residues from biodigesters to use as fertilizer, to create an additional revenue stream, which in our view, to a high degree, adheres to the idea of transitionality, that at some point the KliK Foundation would be able to pull out with the support, and the program is self-sustaining, commercially self-sustaining. The challenge, of course, is the fact that the biogas program already forms part of this NDC package of Senegal, and it will be the task of the developer to find modalities how to differentiate action, ITMO action, that goes beyond the ambition of the government program, to determine what is an ITMO, what can be credited as an ITMO in excess of the NDC ambition, and what is a mitigation outcome that belongs to the Senegalese action pledged under the NDC. Second example is a green credit line in Peru that uses securitized loans to finance efficiency measures in Peruvian SMEs. What we like there maybe most is the fact that it founds on an already existing long-term cooperation between Peru and Switzerland in this field, and is an extension of that program. So there is already a lot of procedural knowledge around. And what's very interesting to us, of course, is the replicability of that model. If we are able to find a way how to link the effect of this concessional finance with the share of mitigation outcome credited, this would be a mechanic that could be replicated with any kind of technology, which again is the main challenge in this field. The question, what's the impact of the GCL compared to the baseline of traditional lending through the domestic financing institutes. Another interesting element will be to operationalize the no fossil lock-in requirement, for which we will have quite pragmatic solutions, I guess. So this is in very brief the two case studies. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Michael again, and he will show you the next steps and open up the question and answer round.
Thank you again, Micha. In terms of next steps, I would like to inform you that about the following. Now, sorry for that. KliK intends to further develop its portfolio. So we have conducted 2 call for proposals already, and we want to continue, and therefore will shortly open the next expression of interest phase that will run for about a month. And in this phase, private institutions can register with the KliK Foundation and will by that be able to participate in the next the 3rd call for proposal, which is then expected to be launched soon after the DEOI phase. Of course, companies, private institutions that have already registered, that are registered with KliK, do not need to register again. The details of the call for proposal, the criteria and deadlines will be published in due course on our website, international.klik.ch. And I would like to mention again that governmental institutions which are registered with the KliK Foundation, they can submit their mitigation activity proposals at any time. They do not need to follow the call for proposals guidelines or deadlines. I would encourage you to subscribe to our newsletter to stay informed and get all the information about the EOI phase and the upcoming call for proposals. With this, I think we can start the Q&A session. You can raise your question, or please raise your question in the chat, and we will then collect these questions and answer them step by step. Thank you very much. Okay, we have now first questions already. So the first question is how Switzerland will ensure that the corresponding adjustment will be made by a host country. That's already a very tricky question, I must say, and it is hard to answer. There is the bilateral agreement between the governments which deal with that question. Each bilateral agreement will look different and will have different measures implemented to, or may have different measures implemented in the agreement to ensure that corresponding adjustments will be made.
Yeah, maybe just to add, it's the bilateral agreement has very strong language in it that requires the host country to do corresponding adjustments on this bilateral layer. And as Michael said, this is the responsibility of the bilateral agreement and the parties therein. The KliK Foundation has no role in this, to say, so it's an accounting issue, and it has been resolved, at least in the bilateral agreements that Switzerland that are on the way. So there is an agreement on how to do it, and Switzerland has a common approach. So there will be there is the intention to have like a sort of a template to this question, but specific provisions may change still.
Okay, suggest we move on to the next question. mitigation outcomes achieved in a host country will be counted within unconditional target or conditional target? Again, a good question. Many NDCs include an unconditional and a conditional target. So we focus, or as Micha already explained, we do not want to crowd out measures to be taken by the host country, the transferring country, under its unconditional NDC target. So we aim at financing or developing mitigation activities that are part of the conditional target of a transferring country's NDC. I hope that answers the question, and suggest we go on to the next one. Will the KliK Foundation procure ITMOs from those countries which do not have quantified NDCs? That's a very hard one. Well, we would not rule it out, but I guess it would be very difficult to ensure additionality of our investment or of our activity and find a solution that we do not crowd out any measures of the transferring country's government.
Yeah, maybe to add on that, we tend to look at the mitigation activities very closely and try to answer these questions on the concrete case, because there are cases where, despite a lack of quantification, you will be able to still identify whether or not the mitigation activity remains outside of the pledged action of the host country. Of course, it makes things more difficult, and ultimately it remains with the decision of the transferring country, and Switzerland has to accept such an approach. But we would not rule out proposals from the inset.
Okay, if that answers the question, I suggest we move on. What are the procedures or steps to acquire ITMOs in the registry of Switzerland? A tough one as well, because there is no example yet. We start basically from scratch, and the procedures, again, to acquire ITMOs are part of the bilateral agreement, and to a certain extent remain to be defined.
Yeah, again, in addition to that, going back to the architecture of the agreement, as it stands now, there is no linking registry available, and in this architecture that is pursued now from the Swiss government, it is clear that issuance at the side of the transferring country will occur to mainly to handle the legal or the legal titles in the mitigation outcomes, but the mitigation outcomes, the units, will not leave the country. They will remain within the domestic registry, and by means of a complementary authorization of the transfer, or request of the transfer, and the authorization by both countries of this request, Switzerland would then issue international attestations within its own domestic registry and transfer it to the buyer in Switzerland, which would be the KliK Foundation. So it's not a transfer, but it's more an cancellation at one side of domestic units and the issuance at the other side of domestic units. The next question on carbon removal. Yes, I do believe that carbon removal, technical carbon removal could be eligible. There is a strong willingness in Switzerland from the policy side to allow or to at least to look into carbon removals, technical carbon removals, and the question here, of course, is how to ensure the permanence of the removal. Then the question on the host country preference. Again, the KliK Foundation has no or does not discriminate countries. Of course, some countries are more difficult to develop projects in, which implies higher project risks that could score poorly in the evaluation. That's for sure. But else, our suggestion is to look at which countries are featured in this list of activities that are going ahead, and these are the countries that already communicated that they will adhere to corresponding adjustments, and with which Switzerland already is in discussions. So that's like a positive approach to look at these countries. And generally, I think that the most important element is a requirement for a country to accept corresponding adjustment as a base case. Then the next question, I'm not sure if I understand correctly. We do basically acquire these mitigation idea notes, and they have a very limited like content of information and may change quite a bit during the mat phase. We are closely involved in the mat phase with the project developer to understand and also to endorse the concrete business case. I hope this answers the question. Then I have to go back to the chat stream because I cannot edit the slides that I'm presenting. So the next question, if you open the chat, how do you assess, calculate the mitigation outcomes from the green loans? Yeah, this is subject to the math development. The higher the contribution of the green loan, the higher the share of mitigation outcomes will be. Maybe there is a possibility even to argue that specific measures in specific sectors will not be financed or financeable. Yeah, we will. This is we hope to share this in half a year's time. Then the question, if we had already had a feedback from project proponents on this very process, of course we do have a feedback, and we developed this process exactly to reflect what's best for to handle this process. A lot of a lot of uncertainties, and we need to be very careful and provide as much guidance as possible.
Maybe to add here, the process may change over time. It's a learning by doing process, and we may need to adapt the process going or down the line.
Yeah, maybe on that stage, very important. Once the bilateral agreement is enforced, the transferring country will come up with domestic regulations and requirements in terms of processes. So there might be, for example, in Peru, a template that needs to be used, a specific body to which the template needs to be submitted to. So that means that the whole main acquisition phase might change considerably for those activities that take place in countries that do have a running process, a domestic process. But this may take time still, and in the meantime, we work according to the process presented. Then to the next question of Matt, POA type projects to transfer ITMOs. In general, we do not rule out CDM registered activities as a tool. CDM may not persist over the years, but still it is a valuable way of structuring mitigation activities and methodologies. They will remain relevant, and they have to be translated into the Paris Agreement context. So we would definitely look into registered CDM POAs that come with, for example, an additional CPA, and we would look at the additional CPA or activities that only have carbon revenues as a revenue stream. They might be considered as well, although there the financial sustainability needs to be proven at somehow, or should form part of the proposal. And also CDM activities that are stopped due to a lack of finance or carbon revenues. Then the next question, precondition of a bilateral agreement for EOI participation, no. There is no precondition of a bilateral agreement. Any country, any project developer or private entity can apply within this EOI, provided that they are strong enough, and of course, as I said, activities in countries that do not explicitly subscribe to corresponding adjustment, they will of course have difficult times to get pre-selected. Now the next of Hannah-Marie is a bit a longer one. I have to read it. Maybe you can move ahead with the next. Or...
Yes, sure. Does the mitigation outcome generating activity need to be identified within the country's NDC? Need to be identified. I mean, as I said, it must be part of the NDC. It must not be part of the unconditional target of the NDC to avoid that we crowd out, or we finance a mitigation activity that crowds out measures to be taken by the corresponding government itself.
Okay, so I got it now. It's about the overselling issue. partly overselling, partly a question how do we handle at the commercial level the event that the transferring country could be non-compliant at the bilateral level. So far, as we discussed with project developer and governments, there is no mention that we have to do or are designing like fallback, financial fallback options. This is also still partly subject to the negotiations. The OMGE SOP issue, the hybrid approach would somehow go into that line. But as of now, we are not intending to withhold payments to buffer against the event of default of a transferring country. And my feeling is that the payment or the ITMO transfers will be negligible against in scale against the domestic actions of countries. So it will be probably not so relevant. And on top, as we focus on activities that lie beyond the unconditional part, beyond the NDC package, it will also be the responsibility of the transferring country to live up its own claim, and the transfers of ITMOs will not be subject of these claims. Okay, then the next one, bilateral framework. Could it also cater for voluntary carbon markets and CORSIA? In principle, yes. Although there will be no means to for a secondary market, so because the units will remain as of now in Switzerland because they are linked to this unit, the uniquely Swiss unit. Then the last question about the possible delay about the delay of the procurement process for on the grounds of missing Article 6 guidance. Switzerland is has the position that there is no basically that Article 6.2 is operational for the purpose of its CO2 law, and therefore the KliK procurement process will not face delays. We are already procuring since 1 year, as Michael showed. We do have an accruing pipeline of activities, and we expect to see the first bilateral agreements by end of this year and next year. So we don't see any reasons to slow down the procurement process. So that was the last question. It is now 10:21. So if there is any further question, please.
There's one just coming in, or there's one just came in. Will the transferring country make sure that the mitigation activity under the bilateral agreement will not be included under the unconditional target when raising ambition in the future? Is this somehow regulated in the bilateral agreement?
Yeah, that's a good question. As it stands now, the the crediting period is set to 10 years to the ending of the bilateral agreement's term by 2030. So the question will arise when the crediting period will be renewed, and will be concretely decided by the transferring country and Switzerland upon it, the renewal of the authorization of the very activity. And it probably, depending on case, it can make a difference, of course, for a situation when the activity has become part of the baseline in the transferring country.
Good. I think there are no more questions. Anyway, if you have further questions later on, you can, of course, send them to us anytime, and we would respond by email. The presentation will be published on the website, and as said, we look forward for many companies to register in the upcoming expression of interest phase, and look forward to receiving many more litigation activity proposals in the next call for proposals later this year. With this, I would like to thank you very much for participating. It's been a pleasure, and we wish you a nice day or a nice evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you and goodbye. Oh, there is one. Yeah, thank you. Bye.